Hey guys, so here we are in part 3, and at this stage we're going to be moving forward to texturing our hero asset. And so here is our hero building. It's made up of a couple pieces that were not part of the original asset, and so there's several pieces that have not been UV'd, and the original asset was UV'd, but the UVs are all over the place. And so in order to texture this correctly in a 3D texturing app like Mari or Substance Painter, you need to UV this. So if we hit space 5, you'll see the current UVs, which are just like all over the place and wrong. And so we need to actually lay these all out correctly. And we need to UV some of these pieces which have no UVs. So if you guys don't know, I recommend you download the game dev tools, because we're going to use some of those nodes that make this system kind of work. It makes it easier. So if you type in visualize, you'll get the game dev UV visualize, and this will let us just visualize kind of what's going on with the UVs in our scene. So if we zoom in here, you can see that this is already UV'd. Oops. This is already UV'd. Zoom in here, you can see that. And the UV islands are their own colors, but some of this stuff isn't UV'd. So if we zoom in here, you can see that these pieces are not UV'd yet. This piece right here, these are not UV'd. And this piece still does not have UVs. So what we're going to have to do is UV these pieces. So if we come up further up here in our SOP graph, here is my setup for everything, and let's just move that up and press the P key. And so these are different structures, and at the bottom they're all being exported out, and we're loading them back into our other scene. So this is the main hero structure, and these are the separate pieces. So if we click on, oops, to highlight this, you'll see that these are those pieces right there. So what we need to do is we need to UV these. So if we start dropping down a UV game dev auto UV, this UV node is really useful and pretty powerful. It works well. Just it has different options. I'm not going to really cover each one. It depends. Just play around with these 4 different algorithms, and they will basically lay out the UVs for you. And generally speaking, it works pretty well just by default. So if we drop this in after our merge here, and I'm not the type of person that really likes to UV all day, so this is great. This tool just works fast. So if we drop this down and we check out our UVs, there we go. It already automatically laid out our UVs for all our pieces here. So let's drop down another one of those. Game dev UV. And let's check out the UVs for this piece, and let it process a little bit. Depending on how heavy the geometry is, it might take a little longer to process. And we'll just see what the result is. And so there's a couple options in here in the methods of packing. You can merge smaller pieces. Like I mentioned, the algorithm has different methods for automatically cutting the geometry. So for organic shapes or shapes with curves, I think a different method is better. The shortest path method, I think, works a little better for curved structures. Since this is all angular, the UV auto seam, in my opinion, works a little better. So we're going to work with that. And I'm going to pause this for a second just because this might take a little longer. I don't know how the geometry is a little complex, so we'll give it a second to kind of just automatically do this. Hey guys, so Houdini actually crashed. I made a mistake, and I plugged in the auto UV node after the merge, and so it had some issues processing everything. So I ended up splitting it up, and so now I've UV'd this branch of the geometry. So if we drop down to visualize UV, let's just click that so you can see that in viewport. Here we've got this geometry UV'd, and there's actually some stretching and weirdness going on, but from beneath it's fine, and the angle we're looking at this from is down here, so whatever. I'm not, you know, we're not making this as an asset that we're going to see from multiple angles, so that's fine with me. This is good enough, and this is a small piece of the overall building, so whatever. We don't need this to be perfect for our purposes. Now, if we wanted to do this correctly, then yeah, we would manually UV this, you know, this and fix this. But I think, like I said, for our purposes, it's plenty good. It's fine, and maybe, you know, we might need to split up the islands or something. But so this is the automatic UV result, and the method I used was just UV unwrap. So this just projects from different planes, from above, the sides, stuff like that, and so that's how it calculates. And so yeah, this could probably be fixed here, this piece, wherever this is at, if we need to, but that's fine for our needs. I think this is good enough. So I'm going to kill the visualize SOP, and I'm going to come down here, and we're going to drop down another auto UV. And again, instead of the auto seam, since this is mostly going to be flat pieces that we're looking at, let's click on this so you can see what piece this is. So it's this thing, and you know, it's pretty complex, the geometry, so we don't want to use the auto seam. That will have trouble. We're just going to do a flat projection from different angles, and so we're just going to use the UV unwrap mode. And so the planes gives you the projection angles, so the top, the bottom, the left, the right, and then it just lays everything out. We're going to activate to merge small islands because we want to just merge everything together. We're going to try for the orientation axis aligned, and we'll just see what we get. And so then I'm going to just plug this in. Oh, and for the padding, I think 2 is fine, so we're going to just drop this in and see what happens. So actually, let me save just in case. This might take a while because there's quite a bit of geometry there, shapes. So yeah, 100,000 polygons, that's a lot. So this might take a little while. So we're going to just let that cook. And while this does its processing, I'll come back once it's ready. And then after that, we'll have both this piece of geometry, this piece of geometry, the geometry from earlier, and then what the model came with, all UV'd. And then we're going to have to lay these out in UDIMs. And so that way we could take these in to Mari. And we'll probably end up doing, I don't know, a couple UDIMs and see how big it gets. So yeah, I'll pause this and I'll be right back. Hey guys, so I'm back. After trying to get this to UV, it was having some trouble just due to how the geometry was built. So I ended up coming in here and blasting away the copies and just using this individual piece. Then I ran it through a clean SOP to get rid of any messed up double overlapping edges or any points that was also causing issues. And then I used the polyfill to fill in some of the pieces that weren't filled. So if we come over here, you'll see how these are missing pieces. And so I used the polyfill to fill that in, drop the normal SOP just to make sure all the normals are okay. And after that, use the auto UV. And so then this, in just a couple seconds, UV'd everything. Then I just used the copy transform to duplicate it. And then I checked it with the UV visualize, and yeah, I mean, there's some problems and stuff, but overall it's okay. And if we look at everything, it's just kind of all over the place. And so we'll have to lay out the UVs. But I mean, overall, it's all right. I mean, yeah, this stuff's busted, but I don't think it's gonna really matter once we put everything together and we look at everything from a distance. So let's unplug that. So then when we put this together and we just jump back down to here, we've got our whole structure. And if we just quickly use the UV visualize just to kind of see what's going on, overall, I mean, the UVs are okay. And so if we zoom in here, you know, they're overall all right. And you know, obviously the textile density isn't right. Like this has much higher textile density than this area does and whatnot. But like I said, we're from a distance where we're going to be working on this. We don't need perfect UVs, just like we didn't need perfect topology. We're not shattering the building. We're not doing anything crazy like that. We're just doing a camera move, and we just need something to paint on to get more textural detail. So let's unhook that. So now that we've got the UVs pretty much on all our pieces, and of course we could not use UVs on this. I mean, I might not even need it. So, you know, so in the end we might not even need to texture something like this. I mean, you might not even notice any of the detail in it. So it might not even be worth UVing this, but we'll see. So now that we've got this down, we need to actually lay out our UVs. So right now, if you look at everything, they're all in the 0 to 1 UV space. And so we need to spread this out. And I think we're going to use UDIMs to give us more textural detail density. And so in order to get this to spread out and be laid out, we need to use this node here called the UV layout. So the Houdini UV layout node automatically lets you lay out your UVs using some of the algorithms they have. So let's actually just make a new one. So you just type in UV layout, you'll get this node. And before we plug it in, because it's going to start processing the moment I plug it in, we want to actually set it to work with UDIMs. So when you have the node selected, we need to change some of these settings so that it'll use UDIMs. So instead of largest for the scale packing, largest packable, we're going to just switch over to fixed. And down here where it says targets, instead of rectangles, we're going to switch to UDIM tiles. And if you click on the tile grid, you'll get some options for the UDIMs. We're going to just use 10 columns. I think that'll be enough, just to see what we get. And yeah, let's just plug this in and give it a second. So we'll plug that in. It's going to start processing everything. And I'm not exactly sure how long this is going to take. This might take a couple minutes. So while this goes, I'm going to have to pause again. And hopefully when we come back, if everything goes well, our UVs are going to get laid out across a couple different UDIM tiles. And if you guys don't know what UDIMs are, it's just a way of getting higher density textures, basically, because your texture UV surface area is split up across multiple tiles, so that you have several 2K or 1K or 4K maps creating one single piece of geometry. So it just gives you higher textural density, in a way resolution, since it's not being isolated to a single UV tile. So it's using UDIMs, which is what Mari uses to paint across multiple tiles at once. So we're going to let this process. Hopefully when we come back, everything's good to go. And after that, we're going to actually bake our shaders that we already have. And we're going to use that to then paint on top of. Since we already have kind of our color positions and our specular levels, we're going to bake those maps out and we'll load those into Mari once we export out the baked shaders. So let this process and I'll be right back. Alright guys, so here I'm back. I had to make a couple adjustments to the settings to get it to lay out how I wanted, and so I'll kind of explain that to you guys right now. So the scale islands to match the surface areas, this is important since we're not manually laying these out. This is automatically going to detect what in the, let's go to the geometry, what pieces of the UVs are taking up the most space in the model. So as you can see, these big, large side pieces and panels, those are more important than, you know, the tiny pieces of this thing, you know. So these shouldn't be as important texture-wise. They shouldn't be taking up as much space or textile density. So if we swap over here, that's what that does. This detects the geometry scale relative to the UV, and so you can see these big pieces are parts of the structure, the bigger chunks, and then in here we've got the small little pieces of our scaffolding and different pieces that for that stuff, right? So that's what these smaller chunks are. And so this took maybe about 3 minutes to process, and the next thing we needed to do was adjust the scale a little bit, since some of them weren't fitting in the 1x1 scale, so they were falling outside of our layout. So I had to switch that down to 0.4 instead of 1. I think 0.5 is a little too big also. Let me check. And another thing we needed to do, well, we could stack identical pieces, like those little ones could be stacked on top of each other, but honestly 4 UDIMs isn't that bad. And in case I do want some details in different pieces so that they're not stacked and you get the same texture in the same spots, I decided to not stack the identical UV islands. But you know, if you guys want to do that, you have that option. But the most important really are the scale to match the surface area, because that lets us cover most of our UVs relative to the scale of the model pieces that are UV'd. And so yeah, right now that I switched over to 0.5, you can see that these pieces did not fit, and so they got pushed out of our UDIM 0 to 1 space. So I'm going to try maybe 4.045, maybe that'll fit. And yeah, so that basically lays it out for us, as you guys can see, automatically, and it does a pretty good job, squeezes everything in. Another thing is the axis alignment. I just kept it on none, just keep it simple. It takes longer to process if you use an intelligent axis alignment system. For this, I think vertical and horizontal, just plain loaded in this way, I think works best. So we're not going to use any axis alignment. What this does is it tries to figure out the rotations for the UVs, and yeah, we don't need that. So I don't think it's worth wasting however long it's going to take to calculate it. I tried it earlier and it took almost like, it just didn't finish. It took forever. So this is still too big. So I guess we're going to have to stick to 0.4. And that'll automatically, like I said, lay out our UDIMs. And these pieces just needed to get a little smaller. So 0.4 is a good size to shrink these down a little, and they should fit. And then we have our island padding. What this does is it changes the spacing between all these pieces, between our UV islands. So each number here represents like a pixel. The default is 1. I think 1 might be a little too small. You might get, while you're texture painting, some overlapping. So I switched this over to 2. I think 2 is a little better for our purposes. And yeah, this automatically generates our UDIMs going across, and from here I think for our next step we'll be able to just bake out, there we go, yeah, 0.4 works better. So we've got 4 UDIMs, and I think we'll bake out these 4 UDIMs using the diffuse and specular color we already have. And from there, we'll just start kind of painting everything and getting everything going. And I think I also use metalness in the shader. So if I did use metalness, I'll be baking out the diffuse, metalness, and roughness. And so I'll be showing you guys how to bake that out. You could add attributes to specific pieces and control and override what's happening with those pieces. We're not going to do all that. I think this is fine for our needs. So 4 UDIMs. So for the next step is we're going to actually bake this out using Redshift, and then we'll finally move into Mari next. Hey guys, so after thinking about it for a little while, even though we have these packed UDIMs, some of these, like I mentioned, like these right here, are just basically duplicates that we could stack on top of each other. So I thought about it, and I did mention that you can do that, where you could stack some of them and not stack other pieces. So I figured, you know what, I'll just show you guys how to actually do this, and that way I might as well get rid of too many of these duplicate pieces, which after thinking about it for a little while, you know, I don't think it's going to matter from this far away if these pieces are UV'd and stacked on top of each other. So, or the these little satellite dishes. So what I think I'm going to end up doing is actually splitting everything up that way. So if I don't think these are grouped anywhere yet, or are they? No, they are not. So I'm going to actually group these, and we're going to stack these also. So let's keep, for now we're going to keep this, which is our UV layout node up here. And actually, let's make this a little bigger. Hit the P key, and let's spread this over. And so this is our group list right now. You can see how it's highlighting. And so the UV layout node, you can have it work on only a specific group. So that's what we're going to end up doing. So let's actually add another group up here, and let's group these just for our UV purposes. So let's make another group node. And actually, we could drop this further up the ladder. Let's come up here. Where are they? I think they're... Zoom out a little. They probably come in right here. Let me check. No, okay, so that's that piece. That's that piece. And they're up here. So let's I believe, yeah, these are auto UV'd. Let's actually group this also. So let's drop down a group SOP right down here. And this group will just, I guess we'll call these, I don't know, I don't even know, extensions, I don't know. Extensions. Yeah, let's just call it extensions. And so now they're grouped. So if we come further down here and we come back to our normal, let's just check that out. We should have that group in here. Okay, there we go. So extensions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new UV layout, and we're only going to select this group, the satellite dishes, and the group for this, the scaffolding right here. See? And let's just make sure we've got satellite. Yeah, so, and then the satellite dishes. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to make another UV layout. And for this UV layout, we're going to UV only those groups. So let's plug this, and actually we could type it in, but let's just plug it in. And so it's going to just process right now with the default settings. That's okay. And I'll give this a second to work, since right now it's going to process everything. I probably should have typed in the group names, but whatever. And of course we could also cancel this, but just so you guys could see what's happening. So this is going to UV everything into a single UV space. So let me, yeah, I'm going to just pause it right now because I don't know how long this might take. And I ended up just hitting the escape key instead. So there's no point in well, really trying to process all this right now, since we're going to end up changing all the settings. So we're going to just activate bypass. And we're going to set up our groups for now, so it doesn't actually calculate or cook this layout. So we wanted the scaffold. We also wanted the satellite. And we also wanted the extensions. And so now that's going to select only those objects, right? And what we want to do is we could do axis alignment. I'm going to, for now, let's just keep it on none. None is faster to process. For the scale, we need to change this to fixed. And again, we need to do the packing type to utum. And what we need to do is the default utum. If we switch over to UV view, we're going to actually have it, instead of lay it out here, because this is where our first UV layout is going to lay out stuff, we're going to just move this, let's just, for now, let's just move it really far away. So we're going to change it to 105. And for our island padding, let's do 2. And I think this is good enough. Oh, and let's stack the island. So actually, let me show you what it does. So let me save so you guys can see the difference. So let it we're gonna let it process now, and then I'm gonna show you what it does when I activate the stack islands, because what we want, there we go. So it brought them down to here. The size is too big, and actually, oh, this is the reason. I need to scale the islands to match their surface area. Also, I forgot that since those are small pieces, we don't need them to be, you know, big. And right now their scaling is also too large. So for the scale, let's try 0.9. Let's see if that fits. That's still too big. Let's try 0.8. And let's try 1 for the value of padding. That still seems too large. Let's see if we can, since it's less data, maybe we'll try island symmetry, see if it could kind of lay everything out correctly. We'll give it a little bit of time. Still too big. Let's just try 0.4 and see if that fits it. Give that a second. And all these UVs in here are not being processed. They're not being laid out, unlike all these pieces. So you can see all these little extra pieces don't fit in our number of 5. But you can notice that a lot of these pieces are identical, like the satellite dish. They're all the same. So for our purposes, I think we should just stack them. So that's what this is going to do. It's going to stack identical UV islands on top of each other. And so the benefit is that we'll save UV space. But in theory, when I'm texture painting, whatever I paint on one satellite dish is going to show up on all of them. But that's okay, like I said, because our satellite dishes are so small. It's such a small detail from far away. You know, it's not going to really matter, that little difference in detail. So anyways, let's hit space and 5 again. And so we're going to stack the islands and let that process. And now everything fit into this little area. And actually, we could probably make this a little bigger. So let's try 0.9. That's a little too big because these pieces didn't fit now. So let's try 0.8. That's still too big. 0.7. And now it all fits. And right now it's inside of UDIM number 5. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we can move this wherever we want. You know, it could be 10. And it's going to move it all the way to the 10th piece. So we're going to leave this to the side for now because we want to see how many spaces these will take up next. So what we do is let's move all this further down. And actually now it's going to start to pack this, which is what we don't want. So let's hit the escape key and let's bypass that for now. And let's move this further down. So this node now, we don't want it to lay out what we already laid out here. So for our groups, we want to add the other groups except for satellite, extensions, and scaffold. So we're going to click platform, paint, metal, light metal, glass, dark metal, and orange parts. So this is only going to UV those pieces now. And it's going to skip UVing the other pieces. And so for these settings, I think scale islands to match. We might switch to axis align. And we might make adjustments because we don't know how big they're going to be. So let's just see what this ends up like. So now let's let it process. Let's highlight this and let it cook. So this might take a little while to cook all those pieces. And when it's done, we're going to see how it laid out across the UDIMs. And then after that, all you have to do, there we go, that was a lot faster. So here we go. This is what we've got. And for some reason, it did not align them across multiple UDIMs, which is weird. I guess everything was able to fit into one spot, which is odd. Let's drop down a merge, and let's just see what we get here. So with a merge, this is what you would do. You would merge these two UV layouts. So you drop that in here, drop that in here. And this will give you both UV layouts. But let's extend this. I don't know why this one in particular is fixed size. Let's try a fixed size of 0.8. Let's just see what happens. And we'll let that pack. And we don't want to stack these. These ones will not be stacked. And I might use rotation. So here we go. So now we've got everything spread out across 2. And we might actually be able to use a full 1. Let's see. Let's try island symmetry. This might take a little longer to process since this is a little more complicated. But let's see what happens. And we'll just give that a minute to cook. Okay. So now it's across 3. Let's make this a little bigger. Let's just make this 1 to see what happens. Because you want to maximize your texture space. So that's what we're doing here. And then what we're going to end up doing is moving our other UDIM tile into the slot next to however many these take up. Okay. Yeah, I think this is good. We've got a good amount of space for all our bigger pieces. And actually this for some reason caused it to bug out. So yeah, we'll keep it starting at 1, 2, 3, and I think this will be okay. And then we'll just see what we end up with. Maybe I'll make them even a little... No, I guess this is fine. I think this will be okay. And so we'll move this. We might actually be able to move it over here and then make it smaller. So we only have 4 UDIMs. But let's see. So now we've got to move this to the side. So to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's move this to UDIM number 5. And, you know, I think we might be able to scale this. So let's drop a transform, a UV transform. And we'll scale this oops. Actually, no, we don't even have to do that. We could do it this way. Just using the UV layout, we'll shrink it down to point, I don't know, 0.6. That might be a little too small, but we can then move this over and then transform it up. So okay, then from here, let's try out with a UV transform upward. So yeah, let's drop down a UV transform again after this. So we're affecting only this area here. And let's translate this to the left. And actually, let's just highlight this so we don't get distracted with everything else. So -1, and we'll try something like that. And let's just see if, yeah, that's okay. So now we don't have them overlapping or anything, and we're taking up as much space as possible. And actually, we're getting duplicate UVs over here, but so we need to actually get rid of that. So we actually need to blast away the geometry we don't want. And because the geometry has the UV attribute, so we could blast it before we plug it in here or after. Doesn't really matter much. I guess before would save us processing time, so let's just do it that way. So let's just drop in a blast. This is going to blast away all our UVs, but we do need satellite. And actually, this is gonna process every time I do that. So let's come up with the blast first and only select the pieces we need. So we need the satellite, extensions, and scaffold. And we're gonna have to do the same, but the opposite up here. And over here, we're gonna blast everything but the satellite, extensions, and scaffold. And so that should leave us and actually no, we need, there we go. And over here we need delete non-selected, and that leaves us with that. Okay, cool. And so now if we do a UV layout, it's only going to process that. It's going to get rid of all the other UVs for all our other pieces. So if we hit Control 5, there we go. And that should be okay. Yeah, see, so now this is empty because we got rid of all the other stuff, all the other data. and we only UV'd those pieces that were left over after the blast, even though we named them up here and stuff. And so then they're all going to come down here. It's going to transform it over. We might, you know, tweak the size a little, but I think that's okay. And let's just save, and we're going to let it all merge. So we'll let this process, and hopefully when we come back, we're going to end up with just 4 UDIMs with all our data. Some of the UVs are stacked, identical stacked, this side. Oh, well, there we go. It already finished a little faster. So there we go. Cool. And let's just plug that into our visualize. And, oops, it unhooked. There we go. So here we go. We've got our stacked UVs. And you know what? I think maybe we could make this a little bigger. So let's try let's try 0.8, see what happens, or 0.7. That might be a little too big, but let's see. If we come to the transform, oops. So let's try 1.5. We're almost in there. 1.4. And yeah, I think that might be too big. So let's try 0.65. .68. And that looks like it fits perfectly. Let's see. Oh, nope, this corner. A little bit off. So let's try 6.7. And I think this should fit now. Yeah. So now we've got our UVs. These are all stacked together, and these are all separate. You can see that our building got the biggest, nicest pieces. And these duplicate pieces, you know, they're big, so we can get some detail in there, but they're going to repeat, and they're just not that important. So let's check out our SOP to visualize all this. And yeah, everything looks somewhat okay. Let's switch off our group highlight view. And yeah, everything looks decent. You know, the UVs look okay. I mean, there's some stretching like up here, but we're not even going to see that angle. There's some stretching in some of these spots, like right here, but this is so tiny that it's not going to matter much. What's important is the big chunks of our structure, and that all looks good. Cool. So as you guys can see, this, you know, it's not too complicated. I kind of explained to you how to split the UVs and how to merge them back together to use different sizes and how to scale the UV using the UV transform or move it around. The automatic UV tools, and you know, the results aren't bad. I mean, I didn't have to manually UV this stuff, which would have taken forever. This is mostly automatic, and it looks pretty good. For our needs, this is pretty good. You know, this is plenty. So I'm gonna save this, and we're gonna write this out to disk now. I think this is okay. So let's unhook our visualize. We don't need to visualize this anymore. And we're going to come down here, and we're going to activate our write to disk. And this is now going to finally write to disk. So let's make sure it's on write mode, hit reload. This is going to write out our structure. Now it's all UV'd, ready to go. We already got groups, normals. If we check our groups, we've got all our groups set up for our material. Everything looks like it's good to go. And at the bottom, so we'll get rid of this visualize UVs now. We've got this material that I copy pasted from our scene that we already shaded. And so this, using this material here, this is what we're going to use to bake out our maps. And so we're going to bake our diffuse colors in and our roughness and metal values. And then from there, we'll finally have everything ready. So for our next step, we got to actually make some bake sets. We got to make a bake set for this object. So I'll be showing you guys that now that all the UVs seem to be ready. I am getting an error in here, so it might be a material error. Pay metal mid was not found. It was the wrong type of operation. Okay, the materials, I have to copy paste them from the other scene. I forgot to copy paste those materials. I only copy pasted the matte SOP, but I need to go into matte context and copy paste the material, the shaders in here from Redshift. So I'm going to do that next. I'm going to just pause for now because I'm going to have to open the old scene, copy paste. It's a waste of time for you guys to see that. So I'll be back and I'll be going over how to make the bake set for our shaders next. Alright guys, so I just made a quick ROP out, exported out our structure as an OBJ so we can load this up inside of Mari. And now we just need to actually make our baked out maps. So let's actually delete this so I can show you guys how to make it. So we're going to drop down a Redshift ROP. Here we go. And I did copy and paste our material shaders, so they're back in here. And we're going to just come over here. And for our output, we're going to switch over to no multi-layer so that each map will be its own file. Then under Redshift, the sampling, I mean, it does kind of matter, but it's not really too important because the maps we're making aren't that detailed or anything like that. But I'll just flip this up to 256. That should be more than enough. And we need, for our output, we need to make AOVs. And so the three maps that we're going to need is metalness and roughness and diffuse. So to make a diffuse, all you got to do is switch over to diffuse filter. This gives you a flat output. And for the name, the way that the baked map file structure is built, it uses this name and the location. So we're going to actually just use diffuse. I don't really want the filter name in there since it's going to be a diffuse map. And the location, we're going to switch this over to text. Or actually no, we'll use render since that's where it's going to go. And we'll just leave the name, we'll use hero structure. So it's going to make a file called hero structure dot diffuse dot, and then it'll use the utum structure. So if I switch over now to where is it at? Up here at the top, there's the render maps tab. You click this. The render maps tab will give you access to baking. So if you activate bake render map, you could select the objects under render map objects. So we're only going to pick our hero structure for now, which is structure 1. And I might actually UV the object in the back, but I'm not going to show you guys that since it's the same process. But we're going to work on only this object for now. And the UV map we're using is obviously UV. And the output resolution, this is how big you want it. We're going to do 4096. I think 4K should be big enough. And we don't need the ROP name for the prefix. That's just going to add the name of our ROP file into our file, so we don't want that. And the UV tiling mode, we want to use utum. And so what these sliders do is it picks which tile, if we switch over to UVs, which one of these to select to render. Now, I'm not entirely sure if there's a way to automate this in Houdini where it renders all of these automatically, so it does all 4. I am not sure if we could do that. There might be a way to script it. In Maya, it just spits out all of them. So here we have to specify. So right now, 1 and 1 means this first one, then U number 2 will mean the second one, 3 means this one, and so forth. So yeah, right now if we render this, it's going to create this file to disk. So actually, let's hit render. So let's render to disk, and that will open up mplay. And here we go, it's rendering. And it's going to look black because I don't have any lights in our scene. So our beauty's pretty much empty, right? And that's, you know, that doesn't matter because we're not working with our beauty. We're making a texture map for our diffuse. And so we'll let that render. And that's going to generate a file where we told it to render, which is inside of here, which is in our render folder. So once this is done rendering, it's going to spit out 2 files, our beauty and our diffuse map. So let's give that a minute. Okay, there we go. It's done rendering. And you'll see it here. Now we've got our diffuse map. And so you can notice the file structure name is how I mentioned earlier, where it's hero structure dot diffuse dot the utim tile. So that's how it's going to set it up. It's going to automatically add the utim tile name, and it's going to add the override name and whatever we call the AOV layer, so diffuse. So now the question is, okay, cool. Now how do I make our AOVs for our other data, which is metalness and roughness, right? Because right now, if I come in here, go to output, there is no option for that, right? There is no metalness option. There is no roughness option. And so the way we have to make this is using custom AOVs. So we're going to make two more, and we're going to open up the common section, and let's close the common here and open up the common section here, and we're going to call this metalness, and actually let's get rid of the capital, and we'll call this roughness. So we just got to remember these names since that's the custom AOV we're going to end up using, and we're going to come down to custom, and actually I should have done that first since it changes the name. So let's do metalness again, roughness, and for our custom prefix we're going to use the same one we used up here. So just copy paste that. So it's going to render it into the same location. It's going to say hero structure, roughness, and then whatever utim we're currently on. And so now that we've got this custom set up, we've got a couple options here. Like we can load a default shader, secondary ray visibility. We don't need to set this since we're not loading a shader across our entire object. But what we need to do is add the custom color AOV data to our shaders. So and we just need to remember the name. So roughness, metalness, keep it simple. So if we jump in over here, and let's actually flip that up and hit P just to have more room, and switch over to our 3D view. If we dive into, for example, metal painted, and we look at our settings, we're using metalness, and our metalness value is 0.3. We don't need to worry, well, we don't really need to worry about the reflectivity since we're going to be painting the metalness values themselves, and our roughness value is 0.2. And I guess if we really wanted to in Mari, we could just set this up also. We would just have to write down the numbers, but it's more work. So we're going to just do it this way. So what you need to do is type in custom, actually AOV, there we go. And there's the option to store our color to AOV. We're going to pick that. And so what you want to do is, it has a beauty input. So this is going to go in there, and our output is going to go back into our surface. And the AOV input, which is this slot right here. And so this is the name of the AOV we're going to write this shader to. And so if you guys saw my AOV tutorial, you guys already kind of know a little bit about this. So in here, we're going to call this roughness. And we want 2 slots in here. So we need to actually pipe something into there. So let's move this up. So we're going to just drop down a constant. And we'll plug this in. And so now we've got 2 AOVs, one going in here and one going in here. We'll call this metalness. And for AOV input number 2, we could just use the color. We don't have to use a constant. I just use the constant so that a new slot would be created automatically. And so for our roughness, we had a roughness value of 0.2. So all we got to do, and we can actually copy or reference it, but you know, whatever. So we're going to just drop down 0.2. There we go. And our metalness was 0.3. So then up here, we just got to write 0.3. Oops. 0.3. Copy that. Paste. And so now it's going to create this color. And so these 2 are going to go to our metalness and roughness AOV. So we're going to just copy paste these nodes just to speed things up. I'm going to go now into our other setup, paste these down. And whatever setting these have, we're going to type in inside of there. So now let's look at our shader. We have roughness 0.1. So for our constant, we're going to make this 0.1. And for our metalness, 0.3, it's the same. Okay. So we'll just copy, dive in, paste it again, scoot this over, oops, plug that in, move that to the side, and we'll check once again our roughness 0.1, metalness 0.3, so I think it's the same. Yep, it's the same. Let's jump into our next pieces. Let's check out the glass. Let's plug in our beauty. Let's plug that into our surface. Let's check out everything again. This has a roughness of 0. And this is 0.1, so we actually need 0, 0, 0 for roughness. And for our metalness, we're not using metalness, we're using IOR. So that's actually irrelevant. We don't have to worry about that. And yeah, I mean, we might paint it. We won't even load it, so it won't matter. And let's go back up. Come over here. Paste it in again. Plug that in. Let's check out our metalness here. So we got 0.3 for roughness. And once again, we're not using metalness. So let's do 0.3. We'll just copy paste. And you know, maybe I will convert these over to metalness. I mean, I might not. That doesn't really make too much of a difference. And actually, oops, it was, let's switch over our metalness to 0. I should do that so it stays black, and I should have done that over here just so it has 0 influence. Wait, is this, oops, no, this needs to be 0.3. Okay, so copy this, paste, paste. It was only the glass that didn't have it. And we're just going to double check everything. Everything's okay. 0.3, 0.1, 0.3, 0.1. Okay, everything looks fine. So now that we have all that in there, if we now render this, so if we come up here, scoot this over, go to our render maps, and we make sure we render our tile number 1. If we hit render to disk, we'll give this a second. And like I said, you're not going to see anything in here, but you know, that's okay. We should get both our beauty, which we're not going to use, our diffuse, our roughness, and a metalness map. So I'm going to let this render for a couple seconds, and then we'll open up Photoshop. We'll open these up in Photoshop and see what, you know, what we get, just to, you know, kind of check. And then if everything's good, we'll switch over to tile number 2, 3, and 4. So this is almost done rendering at 80%. And now that it's at 100, let's come over here and check. Okay. And yeah, it looks like everything's okay. So let's just open this up. So you guys can see, here's our diffuse colors. Here's our metalness. And here's our roughness. And so the roughness has different colors in different spots. So some spots were a little rougher than the others. I think the metalness everywhere was 0.3, I believe. Yeah, so it's 0.3 no matter where it's at. So okay, cool. So it looks like all our 3 maps that we need were rendered fine. And if you guys need other maps for some reason, you know, like you have like noise or bump or I don't know, whatever, right? Just do it the same way with the custom AOV like I showed you guys. And so for our shot, we only need those. So now that we've got those done, we'll actually get rid of the beauty. We don't need the beauty. Let's render out our other UTIMs. And so to render out all our UTIMs in one go, earlier I had it set to 1, so it was only rendering 1. Since we have 4 total, all we have to do is switch over to 4. And so it will calculate the entirety of that width and then the entirety of the heights that we've added. Since we've only added 1 layer upwards, we only need a 1 for the V, but we need 4 going horizontally. So this will now, when we hit render to disk, this is going to process all 4 of these texture maps, and it's going to create our diffuse, our metalness, and our roughness. So I'm going to give this a second, and so you guys know how if it's working or not. Right here in the MPlay, there's this little resolution information. And so right here you can see that it's saying 16,384 by 4096. And the reason why it's that wide is because that's how wide 4 times 4 4096 is, while the 4096 vertically is only 1, so it's just 4096. So, okay, we're going to let this render. Might take, you know, I don't know, 2 minutes, a minute. It's already at 20%. So I'm going to just pause this, and I'll check in to see if our texture map's rendered correctly. And so, yeah, I'll be right back. All right, guys, so it just finished. It took a little over 3 minutes, 3 minutes and 20 seconds. And here we go. It's spit out all our UDIMs. We actually don't need the beauties, so we'll delete those. So we've got hero structure diffuse 1001, 1002, 1003, and you guys can see the different colors and patterns. Then we've got the metalness version and the roughness version. So I'm going to just cut these because I already made a folder in my Mari scratch disk location, and it's on a separate SSD drive just for easier feedback. And I'm going to just paste these in here. So here's our OBJ and here's our texture maps. And yeah, we're pretty much good to go now. So we're ready now to start loading up our Mari project. And we're going to bring in our object and our texture maps. And that should be good to go. So yeah, I'll be pausing this now and we'll be moving over to Mari. Hey guys, I just want to mention that I made a mistake actually. Originally, I was thinking that diffuse filter, where's that at? Up here, would give me the correct color response. And eventually, what I realized was that due to the shader in our materials, using roughness on the diffuse, it actually altered the diffuse filter result. So what we need is just the pure color RGB values. And so all I did was just I went around copying the hexadecimal number, and I just made a new color constant, copied that in there, and added it to our custom AOV. And so this new custom AOV, I just named it albedo, diffuse. It doesn't really matter. So I'll just call this, diffuse. And basically all we got to do is come out here. And so we could get rid of this diffuse filter. It's like I said, not processing the correct color. And we're going to switch over to custom. And we'll call this diffuse. And now it should be good to go. So just wanted to mention that, guys. I made a mistake. Diffuse filter will provide the rendered result with the diffuse filter roughness, but we need pure RGBA, HSV, the color, just the pure raw color. So I just wanted to mention that real quick, that I made a mistake a couple minutes earlier. And yeah, that was causing some trouble inside of Mari. So now that I've fixed that, we just have 3 custom AOVs. We have diffuse, metalness, and roughness. And so you guys can name this diffuse, albedo, whatever. Either one works. All right, guys? So yeah, now let's move back on into Mari and take these 3 maps in. Hey guys, so here we are inside of Mari 4.5. I just kept this as simple and default as possible. So if you're new to Mari and you first open it up, this is what you're going to get. You'll get a default head, I believe, but I already deleted that file. And you'll be first asked, where do you want your scratch disk to go for your project? So I have my scratch disk going to a separate SSD drive just so that I can keep things lighter on that SSD drive. Something else to say about Mari: it's a really powerful and great tool. There is a non-commercial version of it that's free to use as long as you don't use it for any commercial purposes. The limitations, I believe, are there is no Python support, so you can't use any custom Python plugins. The UDIMs, I think the limit is 14 or 11 UDIMs, which is, I think a lot for most people's line of work. And the resolution limit on each UDIM tile, I think, is 8K, which is still really big. So, I mean, if you're not working on some crazy film, and you don't need, or you're still learning how to use the tool, then the non-commercial tool is excellent. It works pretty well with most stuff already. Now, if you guys are using Substance Painter, that's fine. Most of the stuff I'm going to cover in this tutorial isn't going to be too Mari specific. This tutorial isn't really about Mari, so I'm not going to, show you guys every single thing and how it works and stuff. There's plenty of free tutorials on YouTube if you guys want to learn more of the specific stuff, like the new material node system and those things. I'm not really going to use all that. Our shot is relatively simple and far away, so we're going to just stick to mostly the painting tools. I will show one of my favorite things about Mari, though, which is the quick project that lets you project out to Photoshop. So some of us are a little more comfortable with image manipulation in Photoshop, so you have that option too. And so I'll show you guys how to do that later. So yeah, this is how we start out our scene. So we're going to start out with our first project. So up here, you could either go to File, New, or click on this little new Create Project. And you got to give it a name. So we're just going to call this our, what was it, Hero Structure. Yeah, we'll just call it our hero structure. And we got to give it a path for our geometry. So we're going to click this. This is going to load up all our stuff. You know, here we've got all these options. And actually, I should have it already saved. Here we go. D Mari. And so this is where I have my scratch disk location of all our scene files and stuff like that. And so we're going to just come in here, make a new folder, and we'll just call this Hero Structure. We'll jump in here, and we need to bring in our assets. So we need a object format. You could use Alembic, FBX, OBJ. They all work. We're going to just use an OBJ. So I'm going to go to this area and copy paste all our textures and stuff we need in here. And so here we go. We've got our copy pasted everything in. Here is our object, so we'll just select that. By default, it'll use the UVs if it has it. Otherwise, it'll use PTEX. Redshift does not support PTEX yet. I've been asking for it for a very long time. I'm not sure if they ever will. Who knows? Maybe it's not possible on GPU. I'm not entirely sure. PTX is a pretty cool system as it doesn't use UVs, but it does have also its downsides. For the selection groups, you could change this out to create groups or not. By default, I think this is good. Most of the time, you don't have to really mess with this stuff. Now, for our next section is channels. So you could think of channels as the BRDF or the shader inputs. So base color, metallic, subsurface, specular, that type of stuff. So we're going to actually want to import our base color. We're also going to want to create and import metallic. We'll create specular, but we don't have a specular map to import, but we might use it to adjust stuff. I'm not sure. We'll see. And roughness, we want to import our roughness. We'll create a bump. We're not going to actually import one, so we might use the bump while we're working. And the rest of this stuff is fine. We're not going to use clear coat or any of those things. For the shader type, there's different shaders that we could load in. So there's the games, VFX, whatever. You know, what we're going to use is just the principled BRDF, and they have some presets. So if I were to click, metallic, that would switch over to metallic, and it basically did what we just did. Clicked on or off. So this lets you control these things off or on manually, and we're going to create a specular anyways. And this is the size. This is the resolution of the maps. We rendered everything at 4K, I believe. Let me make sure. Yeah, so 4K is what we want. The space, we'll just keep this automatic linear because they're all EXRs. The file space, this is normal. We don't need to worry about that. The depth, that's fine. And so here on the right, we need to actually check for where our textures are. And you could actually have it scan your folder. So if we over here is the root path. If we change this over to, and actually not Mari test, we need it to be Mari hero structure, and we hit enter, you can have it scan and it'll try to load stuff up. So you can see right here, if we scoot over to the right, it automatically detected our diffuse, our metalness, our roughness, and we actually don't need this because this is our OBJ. And it'll kind of figure things out for you. So we're going to need to, actually we do need a, well, let's just switch it over. But that's how it'll automatically detect things. So we want 4K on all of these. We don't want this. This is our object, so this doesn't even make sense that this is here. So let's we'll port everything except for that. So we're going to import these, and this should automatically import our textures and our UDIMs, since it's going to detect for UDIMs. Now we could go to the right, and we have color management options. You could use, just like Nuke, we could switch over to OCIO and all that stuff. It comes with ASYS, and so we're going to switch over to ASYS since that's what we're working as inside of our Nuke and Houdini pipeline. Now I'm not entirely sure if this ASYS is using ASYS 1.03, so I might need to switch over to custom, but you could always change this later. So I think it is, because this is the new version of Mari, so I'm pretty sure they're using that, the new version. The rest of the settings are fine, automatic. And for our shader, we're going to just use current. Our lighting, full. You can change how many lights you want in your scene automatically. 4, I think the default's fine. Environment map, this lets you load in your own HDR, or if you click on the X, it comes with a couple HDRs already built in, and you can just load them yourself. So we'll just load this one in. And yeah, that should be good to go. We hit create new project. We'll give this a minute to process and load in all our stuff. Okay, so it's gonna import each one of our images now. And you can see up here that it's loading up the channels. And yeah, I'm just going to pause this while it processes everything, since it might, I don't know, might take another minute or two. All right, here we go. And now it loaded everything in. Here is our structure. We've got our channels. And actually our channels are not named, which I did not expect. So I'm going to have to check this here. ASYS CG, file space is normal. Huh. For some reason it made multiple channels. That's pretty weird. But yeah, let's to move around, it's like Maya, you know, hold the Alt key, right click, in and out, Alt key, left click, rotate. The number keys give you different orthographic perspectives. Right now we're in orthographic mode. So up here, these are the different options for like the main menu. So orthographic mode, perspective mode, ortho and UV. So if you look at the UVs alone, you'll see that here's our UVs with our textures. And then ortho UV would combine the two. Then we have our projects. Let's go back to ortho. These are the general panels you start with. You could actually close all this stuff if you want to keep your menu simple, and then only open the panels that you want to work with. I think that's, ever since they added this made Mari a lot easier to use. So now whatever you need, if you need channels, you just click channels and it opens up and it goes away. Or if you need it to stick, you just snap it into position. So pretty useful stuff. Up here you have your selection, whatever tool you're using, the options for the tool. So you have opacity, radius, flow, and there's hotkeys for all this stuff, but I'm not going to tell you the hotkeys because I think you guys should see what I'm kind of clicking on if you're new. On the left side you have your different options for selection, your paint tool, that's what it starts with. And if you need to see the hotkeys, just scroll over it and it'll show you what the hotkeys are. This is your stamp tool. This is like your warp texture tool. This is your marquee selection, your eyedropper, your color swatch, and your opposite color swatch. X, just like in Photoshop, if you hit X, it switches. It's a lot like Photoshop in a way. It's like a 3D Photoshop. Then right here you have your color to switch it back to black and white, pure black and white. Down here you have selection modes. So you can select like in patches or objects or the faces. Down here you have the current channel, so you can only view the channel you're on, or current layer and below, and so on. And then right here you have like to isolate the lighting. So if you want flat shading, this will give us no lighting information. It's just the flat texture data, as you guys can see. So this is cool if you're trying to just see only what you're painting. And there's different modes. There's basic and full. And like I said, there's hotkeys for all these things. There's also the projection if you want to mirror stuff, disable mirroring. And the way all this works is based on the projection method that Mari uses to paint. So that's why it works well with matte painting, because it's all camera to projection painting based. So you could use it with the Nuke Mari bridge or with the Nuke in Photoshop. So I'll show you guys the Photoshop Mari bridge a little later. So yeah, cool. So now we've got some of the basics down. I'll kind of go over just a couple of these panels and then we'll get started on something. And actually I might change this HDR. I don't like that it's tinting everything that little pink. So over here we've got our options, and under lights, this lets you select your lights and which let's slide this up a little. So yeah, you have default lights and you can rotate them around, you can turn them off. So like if I click on, off, you'll know, oh, it's kind of subtle, you guys might not see it. There we go, you can see it there. These are like 4-point lighting. And then environment is where you could change the intensity of your HDR, rotate it, stuff like that. Load a new HDR. We're going to load a different one. Let's try this one. Yeah, this is a little better. So okay. And yeah, that's what that does. Our channels is, like I mentioned, are different channels. So you can think of them for your shader as like diffuse, specular, and so on. These little icons represent if it's color data or if it's float data, so just black and white data. Our colors tab, well, it's like any app. It gives you your colors. Your history is your history, so your undos. Image manager, this is where you can load in textures that you might project. We don't have anything loaded in, but you could add them in here. We might use this later with like some techie brick to kind of add texture to the diffuse and bump. Our layers is just that. It's layers. It's like a layer system. So you come in with the base and then you have painting layers on top. So if I turn everything off, you'll see that things got turned off. And if I could turn off everything, we end up with just the a random map, so you know that everything's turned off. So let's activate all this again. And inside the layers panel, you have different options. So you could add new layers, a mask for your layer, a mask stack, adjustment layer. So that's exactly like Photoshop, gives you adjustments. So if I click this, there's like brightness, contrast, levels, all that stuff, just like Photoshop. Where were we? An adjustment stacks. It's basically the same idea. Procedural layer. These are really cool. So this is different procedural noises. You could use geometry, procedural fractals, noise, you know, stuff like that. So we'll be using this. A graph layer. So I don't really want to go too into this, but the graph system is all this down here. So one of the cool things about Mari is it's basically Substance Designer kind of mixed with Substance Painter. So you can paint with all the painting tools, but you also have nodes. So you could work just using nodes and never actually have to paint. And the way the node's set up is, think of it just like you would any node shader system. It pipes in and merges stuff. Then you have your layers. You have your shader that it all connects to. You know, it's pretty straightforward. We're not really going to use this because this is a whole other thing. You know, this is. But I mean, if you guys kind of already know how to use shaders, you'll figure this out pretty quickly. And it's just like Nuke. You can hit Tab key, and you know you got all your nodes and stuff. If you need to figure out exactly what does what, you know, read the documentation. I'm not going to use this really because our scene doesn't really need that. Node properties, it gives you, you know, the node properties panel. Objects, this includes all the objects in your scene. We only have one. We're only going to load this structure. You could load an entire scene if you want with Mari, which is cool. You could have several objects laid out. We're only going to work on this, so only one object, that's fine. And you know, you have options for like shadows, subdividing, stuff like that. Painting, this is, pretty much you could think of it as the way that everything's being painted. So if it's painting black point, white point, multiplying things, the projection settings, if you want to use a mask to be able to see the mask, stuff like that. Patches, these are the utums. So if I select, or let's see, if I hide them, you can see that it's hiding certain patches. So this lets you kind of quickly solo out utums. Projectors, this is if we're using camera projections, and that's a whole other thing with Nuke and stuff. I mean, you could do other stuff with projectors, but that's one of the main purposes that I've used it for. So we're not going to go over that because we're not using the Nuke Mari bridge. Python, well, you know, you need to have Python. I don't really code much, so that's not going to do much for me, but you know, some of you guys might you know Python. Selection groups, this lets you, whatever groups the geometry had, this lets you make selections on them. So like earlier, you know, we made the scaffolding, and actually where's that at? It's on the other side. So rotate around here. So right here we've got our scaffolding, and so here you could lock it so you don't paint on it. You could hide it. And oddly enough, I did not realize that that was not a part of it, which is kind of weird. It's not a part of our scaffold group. So that might cause problems later. You know, we've got our extensions and so on, right? Then the shaders tab, this is essentially the shader, the way that the shader is being built. So you can make new shaders, and they're based on BRDFs like Legacy. If you were working in V-Ray, the principled BRDF is the principled shader from Disney. This is basically what all shaders are based on nowadays. The RS material and the Arnold surface, all that stuff is almost using the same parameters as the principled BRDF. So typically this is what people stick with. Shelf. The shelf gives you just like the shelf options. So if I slide this down a little here, so you guys can see it. Oops. And bring this down. This will give you some of the brushes it comes with, some of the materials that Mari comes with. So just like Substance has smart materials, that's what these are. They're full-on materials. So they have roughness, bump, all that stuff already on there. We're not going to use these, but they can be useful. And you can make your own and save them and share them with other people. Personal, this is what you would just, if you loaded in your own brushes. Mari lets you load in Photoshop brushes, which is great. And yeah, that's about, you know, what all you need to know. Hard surface stuff, the classic brushes, organic brushes. Yeah. So this is where you can find all that stuff. And like I said, you guys could load your own stuff in here. Snapshots. These are, I'm not even entirely sure exactly. I think these are snapshots from the viewport. Texture sets. So if you have like Megascans and you're loading in Megascans textures, they'll come in as sets. The properties of the tool. So if we're using the brush, this will give you like all, like just like in Photoshop where you could change the shape and add noise or stuff like that, rotate the brush. That's what all this does. So it's the same thing. So yeah, I think that kind of gives you guys a general outline of all our stuff here, right? And so yeah, I think I think I explained everything, how everything works in general. And yeah, let's get rolling and actually get something going here. So I think what I could do is I want to add roughness, just a noise across the whole thing, because right now it's all even, it's all the same roughness level. So I think that would help with our variation, and eventually we'll move on to like projecting textures and stuff. And actually I need to look for some techie texture shapes, stencils, alphas, and so I'll look that up and we'll bring those in. But yeah, anyways, let's actually save this and let's move on. And actually I noticed that something isn't right. For some reason our channels didn't load in right. They're all blank. So I'm gonna scratch these and we're gonna have to read these in manually. So let's yeah, we're gonna just remove these. Remove everything here. Let's start from scratch. Actually, this is fine. We'll just rename this. This is diffuse. And because for some reason our diffuse, and actually I just realized I accidentally painted over our diffuse here. So let's go back to our layers here and let's just remove all our layers. We're going to delete this. Remove. Remove. And remove. And let's say I need to load in a texture. So we're going to load in our diffuse. You can import into a new layer. And we're going to load in our diffuse here. And we want to import all patches. So we're going to hit import all patches. Give that a second. And now we've got our diffuse. And we're going to add a new layer just so that way we don't paint on our base. And so now we need to actually make a new channel because it loaded in all our textures into the same channel, which it wasn't supposed to do. We needed it to be diffuse, roughness, and metalness. So now we're going to add a new channel. This needs to be 4K. 16 bits fine. File space normal, that's okay. Technically, I guess this is scalar data. And for our name, we're going to call this roughness. And so this needs to be scalar data because we're not actually bringing in any color data. So we're going to hit OK. And it's going to be blank. And you'll notice at the bottom, this is where our color space is. Notice how it's in raw ACES, and that's because ACES does not care about scalar data like roughness, metalness, specular. It only converts color data. So if we switch back over to diffuse, it's back to ACES sRGB. And we were actually using Rec 709, so let's switch over to Rec 709. And so now we have our diffuse and our roughness. Let's head into our roughness, and for our layers, we're going to import into current layer our roughness, import all patches, give that a second. Now for our channels, we're going to make another new channel, 4K, 16-bit float, scalar data, and for this we're going to use metalness. We're going to hit OK. And actually, we should. I messed up when I first imported everything. It should have done this automatically, but I might as well show you guys how to import your own maps and make your own channels anyways, because this is important to know how to do. So yeah, now we're in metalness. We're going to load in our metalness map. So go to layers, right click our base, import to current layer, and we're going to select metalness, import all patches. Cool. And for our layers, let's actually add a new layer on top. And for our channels, for roughness, let's also add a new layer. So that way we don't end up editing the bottom layer. And now what we need to do to make this look right is we need to add this to a shader. So if you come down to shaders, right here, we're going to right click. We're going to select add new shader, and we're going to use the principled BRDF. So this is going to create the principled BRDF shader. And this gives you all these shader inputs like any shader, you know, on the RS material or whatever, right? And so what we're going to do is for inputs, we need a base color. So we're going to select, it automatically detects the channels that you've built. And so, oops, where'd it go? Oh, well, it's still open. We're going to just select diffuse. And that's going to now load in our diffuse map. And we're also going to load in metallic, or metalness, I should say. And no, we don't have specular, we have roughness. There we go. And we're going to load in roughness. And so you can see that the specular is kind of moving around. The windows are black because we don't have any diffuse color inside of them. But we do have roughness and no metalness. And yeah, everything's pretty much set, ready to go. And so what we need to do now is actually start texture painting some stuff. So I'm going to actually adjust the roughness. So let's go to our channels, and we're on top of the roughness channel, and go to our layers. And actually let's snap our layers to the side, because I'm probably going to be going in and out a lot. And let's add on top of the base a procedural noise. So there's different noises. There's fractal, turbulence, cellular, Perlin. Let's try, well, we could do, yeah, let's try Perlin. And so it gives you the option of black or white. So as you can see, if we come in here now, we've got that roughness. And you could single out the pattern. So like I mentioned earlier, there's flat mode, which is F1, and full mode, which is what everything put together. We hit flat mode, and we need to not see everything, the user shader, but we want just the current channel. Now we could see only our Perlin noise. So we're going to adjust this. You can change the size, the strength. It's it's pretty interactive, as you guys can see. And if you guys remember the roughness, white is completely rough, black is completely shiny. I believe we had it somewhere at like 0.2, 0.3. So it wasn't perfectly shiny. So what we want to do is we want to have maybe 0.2 here. And there we go. I don't know why it got stuck. So something like, let's just try 15. So it's kind of rough, but not too rough. And for the white, we'll bring this down because I do want it to be shiny. So maybe 0.5. All right, and then we'll switch back to viewing with the shader. And instead of singling out, we're going to use full. And so, okay, this gave us a little more variation. I think the pattern might be a little too big. And we're going to need to adjust it, isolate it with masks only into certain spots. So let's adjust the size a little more. It's 0.3. That'll just give us a little bit of variety. Maybe make it even bigger. And we'll drop down another adjustment layer, and this time, or another procedural, we'll make this I don't know, let's try cloud. And this is smaller, and this will be more of a detailed roughness noise. Let's try 0.2. $15. Maybe make these a little closer. And then we'll make a mask of this, actually. And that way we can mask this on top of our Perlin that, or maybe we'll use the Perlin to mask this. I don't know, we'll see. So let's say we wanted to mask this out. If you have your object selected, your cloud, which is this noise, right? You could add a mask stack. And so what this is like kind of like a group folder in Photoshop. So if I click this, it adds this little icon here. And so if I click this again, you can add multiple masks to this single paint layer. So if I come in here, you'll notice that we have the same icons as we do down here. So if I click that, let's add now a procedural mask. And we're going to just do a procedural turbulence. And you'll notice, here we go, that it masked out the bottom layer of that. See, so that's pretty neat. And so some spots have a little more of that textural detail. Some of them reveal the detail from the purlin below. And so let's switch this over now back to visualizing with the shader. And it's there, but it's pretty subtle. But that's okay. You know, we want those subtle variations in the highlights and the roughness and stuff. Cool. And so we could add more masks, we could add selection masks and so on. So like, let's say I wanted to add, I don't want that roughness on the glass, for example. We want this to have its own unique roughness. We would use the group selection tool, or we could use the groups. Where was that? And that'll let us group out or isolate that out. So for example, with the selection tool up here, there's different things you could do. You could click, and right now it's just using the connectedness of the mesh. So I could, you know, if you want to isolate specific spots, you could use that. There's also the marquee or the lasso tool, the smart selection, so it like tries to intelligently figure out what pieces are together. And then also, let's just unclick everything. While you're in this mode, if you switch over to, where's it at? Patches. No, not the patches. Where'd it go? Objects, no lights, layers. Oh, there it is. Selection groups. Here we go. This gives you all those options, and so you can select something. So like if I click on metal or whatever, the groups that I made in Houdini. So we want to select all the glass. And now we've got all the glass selected here. And this lets you add masks based on that. So you could layer mask, add mask, remove mask, disable mask, convert. You could add based on your selection. You can right click, and there's different options here, like you could hide stuff that's selected. You can lock it so you can't paint on it. You can make a patch or a selection group so that it ends up over here for later use. You can fill it in with a color. There's just so many options, so much stuff you can do with this. But anyways, yeah, we just wanted to make a mask to mask out the purlin noise and the cloud. And the purlin, so first we're going to mask out the purlin. So click on the purlin, right click, and under layer mask you can add a mask, and we're going to choose from selection. And let that process a little. And so if we switch over to visualizing only the current channel, and let's click away, and let's hide the cloud layer, you'll notice that we need to actually invert our selection, because now it's only in the glass. Or maybe we'll keep the purlin only in the glass. We'll see. That might actually work for us. So let's try, and no, let's invert this. So there's different options in here that you could use. You can remove the mask, you can make it part of a mask stack, you can convert it. You can import textures if you already have a mask painted in another app, for example. And what we're going to do is actually, let's use our selection again. So come to our selection groups. Let's select our glass. So right click it, select our selection group here. And now we've got it all selected. We're going to come up to our layer mask here. And let's bring this down. And we're going to create a new mask down here. So new layer mask. Give this a second. And we're just going to make a new layer. And we're going to use the selection that we have. From selection. And it's going to mask out this new layer. And so on this layer we could paint or fill or do different things that we want. So let's click. So if we switch over to the paint tool, and I think we're using black and white. Nope. Hit the X key. Oh, I accidentally have it hidden. There we go. You can see that if we paint, right now it's painting outside of it. But you can see if we zoom in here, that it's cutting out all that influence. And yeah, I mean, you guys can kind of see where this is going. It might take a while, but here we go. Let's paint away. And we could use the fill tool also. That would probably work. We can manually come in here and paint stuff. Cool. Okay, so I'm gonna just spend a couple hours working on the roughness, and then I'm gonna pause it so you guys kind of already know what I'm doing. You get the idea. And once that's all taken care of, we'll move on to the diffuse next. So yeah, I'll be back, guys.